this is it starts way back in the summer of 2002. I was at that time I had been hang gliding for a number of years and used to compete, and I went to Aspen for the Red Bull Vertigo event 2002, and the whole idea was we're going to go in the morning at 6 in the morning and see the speed gliding competition,
I
and
remember
then
that. Yeah.
yeah, and then in the afternoon, my whole deal was, well, we're going to see the paragliders as well, but then I'm going to go up and try to fly myself in the afternoon. So I left Marilyn, my wife, with a little dog in town, and I went up the hill. It was a beautiful day. It started to get cloudy, and I wanted to kind of try to take off before it overdeveloped. So in those days, it used to take me quite a while to sit up. So I get up to the very top of the mountain, sit up my glider. It takes me about over an hour with oxygen and everything.
Mm.
And while I was in the middle of the setup, there's two dudes with a paraglider come. I mean, they come in, they just set up their paragliders. I mean, in less than 10 minutes, and they're airborne. And all I could do was just kind of look in awe and also disgust and jealousy. And then went back to concentrating on setting up my glider. And after I finished, I get in there, and I did not have many people to help me out. So this was going to be kind of a launch by myself. So I had to be sure that everything was right. And by the time I set up my whole equipment, hook in, and get ready to take off, I get this breeze on my neck. And I went, shit. Because I knew that at that altitude, takeoff, it has to be perfect, right angle of attack, and if you can have wind coming up the hill, then it's going to be a safe launch, otherwise it won't. And I knew that little bit of a shift in wind meant I'm not going to have wind coming up the hill, and on top of that, that's the sail that it's building behind me, and it's going to get dangerous, so I'm probably going to have to break down. And to go through all that, big, I would say, effort to get up the mountain, sit up, and do all that, and then have to break down. It's kind of a bummer.
Mm-hmm.
But I broke down, another hour to break down, put the glider on top of my SUV, and then I slowly started kind of coming down the hill. And as I'm driving down the hill, I see these two guys walking up with their paragliders in their arm. They're not even in their packs. They have the, what do you call the little, in Spanish there's a word for it, but anyhow, they're bringing the paragliders in their arm, and I open my window and I say, hey, do you guys want to ride to the bottom? And of course they go, yeah. And as they started getting the vehicle, they put their paragliders in there. Immediately I can tell that, just like me, they have an accent when we start talking. And I said, hey, where are you guys from? And I could tell one guy is from Spain and the other guy is from Argentina, which is where I'm from. And I go, wow, same accent. He's from, my part of the world, even in that, even in Argentina. So we connected, and and they introduced themselves. And here I find out that one of the guys is one of the Rodriguez brothers,
Mm-hmm.
and the other guy is Hernan Pitoco, and I recognize those names.
Yeah.
And I'm going, oh, they're the guys that are here for the aerobatic part of paragliding.
Mm-hmm.
So we start talking, and I asked him, hey, what do you guys bring your paragliders in your pack? And he goes, oh, well, we were practicing for the maneuvers, for tomorrow, and Hernan goes, and I just kind of blew a maneuver, and I had to release my emergency parachute. I go, dude, wow, did you just do that? And he goes, yeah, just that. And for hang gliding to let go of the emergency parachute, the reserve, it's a huge deal. So I go, wow, that's like one in a lifetime event. And he goes, well, this is my 6th time. And I look back at him, and I'm driving, and I just met him, and I start pontificating to him, and I go, man, they're raffling a really bad accident, and you're buying all the tickets. That's not good. And so I talked the whole way down that this is not a good deal. But here's where I'm going to fast forward the story, because here, as I pontificated to this guy this whole way down, Now I'm going to fast forward to 7 years, where what happened in between is I stopped flying hang gliders the next year because our daughter Victoria was born, and it was kind of too much of a hassle with the whole setup and going to the mountains and putting the thing on top of the car and everything. And my brother had been already telling me, hey, why don't you go into paragliding? It's going to be a completely different deal, and you can go in and out. And it was about a couple of weeks after my daughter was born that my brother took me in Argentina to this place where, by the way, that's where Hernan lives, Hernan Pitogo. But he takes me over there, and he says, look, we're going to go, let's do a tandem ride. You do a tandem ride, I do my solo, and we'll go out there and come back before Marilyn and Victoria know you're even gone. An hour and a half, we'll be back. And sure enough, he takes me there. In about, we get to the site. It took us 25 minutes to get there. We get to the site. I connect with the people that are doing tandem flights, and in less than 10 minutes, we're about to get airborne. And I'm going, wow. Not only we get airborne, my brother joins us because he's already airborne. He did it in less than 10 minutes, and we're flying inside. Weather is beautiful with all these paragliders flying around, and the next thing is a Condor joins us. And I went, whoa. We fly with this Condor, and then the instructor says, hey, how much time do you have? Because the conditions are kind of mellowing, and if we go down to the bottom of the hill, it's going to take a long time for the retrieval, but if we can top land, we can just finish right now. And he goes, no, I want to go home, and he makes a turn, comes back around, we land. 25 minutes later, I'm done. Flew with Condors, right back home. Less than an hour and a half, we're home. And I was hooked. But in addition to that, I had already done my statistics because a lot of my hang gliding friends says never get into hang gliding. It's dangerous. You're going to get hurt. But I had done my statistics. I asked the guys over there, the guys that do the tandems, how many flights do you do a year? And some of those guys have been doing an average of anywhere from 200 to 300 flights a year. So I said, well, let's use 200 flights a year. I know that there were about 10 of those guys that hang around the whole time professionally. And so I did an average of 200 flights, 6 guys, so that's about 1,200 flights, and they had been doing it for 10 years at that place. So I kind of did that rough analysis, and it was 0 fatalities. So I thought, this is a pretty good sport. And I decided to jump in it, and I decided to hire myself the best instructor in Argentina that I could. And I did the training over there, and he warned me from the beginning because I brought all this experience from hang gliding, and he thought, hey, Luis, you're getting yourself in a risky place here, because on the very first altitude flight that we did after all the bunny hill training, the flight plan was you take off and you go straight down the hill. And I showed up a little later in the day, and instead of sticking to the flight plan, I took off closer to 11, and I took off and went right to the first thermal that I could find and started coring it and climbing up. And over the radio, he says, that was not the flight plan. And he wanted me to land. And after that, he gave me a spiel about, hey, look, you're putting yourself, I know you have all this soaring experience, but you're putting yourself in a place where you don't know how to command the glider yet. But I try to keep myself safe, kept on getting instructions for not only him, but then I came to the States and also got instruction over here and kept learning the gliders. And 4 years after that, when I was about to, I did quite a bit of flying, and I did not have my ratings to fly at a lookout. So I went to Boulder, and I was just about to I did the test to get certified for my immediate rating so that I could go to lookout. But in the meantime, what I was doing with other guys is I would go up Locust Strait and just walk up there. We would sit there and wait for a thermal, and we would ride it up. So we were using this training hill not as a training hill, but as a launch pad to try to go up, and which I successfully had done. This was in 2009. I successfully did for a few days, and one of the flights I was able to get 40 minutes and went 2,500 feet above launch. And so I was trying to do that same thing in September 2009, and I took off, and pretty quickly I realized that I wasn't climbing, and I realized that I had missed the thermal that we so much wanted, and it was right above us, big cloud. And as I'm heading down there, I look over my left, and I see a dust devil, and I go, oh, that's the thermal. It wasn't that I missed it; it was that it wasn't there yet. So I had no better idea. This is the addictive part of me wanting to stay over, when all I had to do was go straight and land. Instead, I make a left turn and head straight for the dust devil, thinking, wow, there's the thermal up there. And I got in it, and I'm less than 200 feet at this point, and I do half a turn in it. And as soon as I do half a turn climbing up, the worst fears comes through, and I realized there that I made a fatal mistake, and the glider just goes whoosh, and it collapses. I put all the recovery techniques, but it was not very well. I mean, they were effective for a little bit, but when the glider recovered in a spiral, and now I'm thinking, well, there's not enough room to recover from the spiral in an organized, way as you're supposed to do in a paraglider. So I just kind of yanked it, and the next thing I know is I'm looking at the air just like a little kid in a swing, with my back to the ground and my eyes looking up at the sky. And I thought, I'm not going to survive this. And at that moment, I did something, kind of closed my eyes, knowing that it was not going to be a nice impact. And I hit the ground pretty hard. And when I opened my eyes, I was still there. And the incredible thing is I survived, but I survived barely. I ended up 2 weeks in ICU, and it was a 2-month recovery process at Craig Hospital after not only breaking a lot of bones, sternum included, 2 vertebrae, and sacrum, coccyx, pelvis in 3 places. So it was a pretty bad accident. Luckily, I recovered from it. I was very, very fortunate. But one of the big curiosities that I had after I came out of that was, why is it that Hernan, this crazy dude doing all those crazy things, didn't crash, and I did. And interestingly enough, as I dug into, our in the part of my job which it connects with not only training but expert learning and how we progress, the answer kind of started to come out. And what I found out was, how the way that we learn is that when we're developing a new skill, we usually push the envelope to a little bit of failure. Mm-hmm. Look at the skill envelope, right? So that would be me, the average pilot, if you will. And that would be Hernan, the crazy dude that does all this crazy aerobatics. And we think, his envelope is way over there, and my envelope is, much smaller. But what I learned is how did Hernan, who is a professional, got to that point? And the way he got to that point is the same way an average pilot begins learning, is you take your skill envelope and you push it to the point of failure, but just a little bit, not so that you get in trouble, but just a little bit. So this is what he does. So over time, because he does it over and over and over, his envelope starts to do this. So he's just pushing it a little bit until eventually he gets up there to the point where you see, wow, that's an incredible envelope. But he didn't get there overnight. He got it there over, and in research they usually quote that the experts put in around 10,000 hours to get to that level. So then when you compare, see, in my view, I thought, well, I didn't think that I was pushing the envelope as much, when in reality, if you look at it, if you go to the next slide, we would say, here's my green and there's his envelope, but what I did is this. when I went into that Dust Devil.
Yeah.
I was going way beyond my envelope, and it was not in a small way, it was in a big way. So in reality, risk analysis wise, I was actually pushing the risk envelope significantly much more than Hernan did. So in that way, I was a lot more riskier than he was. And then, so that's one of the parts of the, why I got myself into trouble and he didn't. Because then when I learned is the more I connected with him as well back in Argentina when he practices, um, he doesn't do his maneuvers at 200 feet off the ground. He has two emergency parachutes, and one of them actually it's a triangular steerable parachute.
I have the same setup for my acro harness. Yeah, it's pretty
Right.
common.
So you're familiar with that, which I wasn't, and especially back then. And I remember at a time when he was perfecting the Infinity Loop back in Argentina, he became an incredible cross country pilot, not because he liked flying cross countries, because he was a great climber. And he wasn't a great climber because he just loved climbing. It was he needed to climb really fast because he wanted to go really, really high so that he could practice his maneuvers.
Sure.
So he would go up to close to 6,000 feet, and then he'll practice his maneuver. And if he would blow it, as he did one day when I saw him later pack his emergency parachute, um, and I had a different feeling at that time about pulling the emergency parachute because he went up. He was about 4,500 feet over the ground when he flew into the glider doing one of the infinity loops.
Hmm.
And as he crashed into the glider just kind of enveloped him. And he had to first extricate himself from the lines in the glider before he can actually release the emergency parachute. And that's I mean, if you think about the presence of mind of just being, free falling inside the glider, trying to get himself out before he can release the emergency, that's pretty amazing. The the part where I connected is how he's pushing his envelope. Is he's actually putting a big safety net around him,
Yeah.
which is the altitudes and the two parachutes.
And the discipline. Don't
Exactly,
forget
and
the
that
discipline because I practice acro all the time over the ground, and so I set a hard deck, right? I mean, I promise myself I won't go below a certain altitude, but then what it takes is the discipline to not break your own rules,
correct.
which I've done too before. So
Right, but again,
it takes all of that.
it takes all of it. Eh, and here's the part that sometimes we have a little bit of a disconnect with is that we don't see it, which is what's happening when you're pushing the envelope and you fail. And that's the part where expert learning. There's all this research, and a lot of it comes from I think University of Florida or Florida State. But anyhow, in Tallahassee, I think it's where they are, those experts over there. And some of those pieces of information were pulled in a book called The Outliers. Um, but anyhow, one of the things they talk about is what's the difference between the expert and the average. And it's what they call the OK plateau. The experts, they would push that OK plateau. The OK plateau is the average people will get to a certain point, so they'll push the envelope. But once they get to a place where we think that we're good enough, we just kind of stay right there. And because we're good enough, we don't want to push that envelope and fail anymore because we're good
Yeah,
enough.
right. We call that I think we call that a comfort zone,
The comfort zone.
right?
The experts, if they're competing and they're professional and they want to be at the top of the game, they keep pushing that envelope over and over and over. Well, most humans do that in many other areas, and driving is a perfect example. Is what's happening when you push the envelope? Well, when you have the failure, you get that zap of how I messed up, and you get that actually chemical reaction, which doesn't feel really good, which is like, yeah, I can't believe I did that.
Mm.
However, when you actually keep practicing and you succeed, then there's a zap that goes, wow, I got that right. And there's actually a physical connection that takes place when you got that feedback that you got it right. and it's building those connections that allows you to go into the automatic processing.
Mm-hmm.
If you compare that to a 16-year-old that just started driving, that's the reason why they don't get insurance until they're 25. It's because they don't have those connections built yet.
Mm-hmm.
That's why somebody that has been driving for a long time, they can get away with texting sometimes, maybe talking. I'm not saying that it's. I'm
Really
not
good
saying
example, Luis, though, because sometimes we get away with things that aren't safe, and we make that, like you said,
correct.
make that connection. It's like, oh yeah, that worked. That's okay, right? And it's really the wrong connection to be making, right?
That that is
Like
true.
texting and driving, usually you get away with it until one day you want you
Right.
not.
Right. And that's what uh, we call that you want to bring consciousness into it. That's what complacency is, and sometimes they don't explain what complacency is. But complacency is letting your system run on autopilot.
Mm-hmm.
The important part to connect is that as you're learning, you cannot be in autopilot because you don't have autopilot yet until your connections are built.
Mm-hmm.
But once you have gotten to that expert level, or that place where you have put those 10,000 hours, then all of a sudden you can run in automatic. That's what will get you in trouble. That's when the complacency part comes in, because now you rely on that automatic process that works most of the time until it doesn't. So that's where texting kind of fails, because yeah, it worked, you got away with it, many times,
Mm-hmm.
but in reality you did not have your full attention into what you were doing.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the aspects too. And the other part of what I call this anatomy of an accident is the one that you're very familiar with in the aviation world, which is the chain of events of an accident. When you first start thinking about going flying, we say that an accident is nothing more than a chain of events, and the earlier in the chain, the easier it is to break the links. But as you get closer to the actual event, then it's harder and harder. So it starts with, here you are in the morning and decide to check the weather, and the weather's good, and so you say, hey, I'm going to go flying. But there was something that gave you a little quizzy feeling on the weather, something that didn't quite felt right, and that was your opportunity to stop it, but you didn't. So the next step was, hey, I'm going to go flying. So now you have your discussion with your spouse and your arguments, and she had different plans for the day, and you said, hey, I want to go flying. And after you succeed, or you thought you did, then you start loading the stuff on the car and putting all the equipment together, and now just things start to, you have invested a little bit more time into the whole process. So now the next link in the chain of event gets a little harder to break. So then you put in, and now you go for the 2-hour drive to the mountains. And again, that's all time that you're investing in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get up, you unload the equipment, you get it up, you walk it out the mountain, and things starting to get harder and harder, because now you don't want to say, no, I'm going to pack everything up and go back home. So then you go ahead and set up the glider, and then you get to the point of, okay, now I'm ready to launch, and I go and hook in and get myself in the harness. And that's the most difficult place to actually break the link, and to say, I'm not going to go fly, which connects back to the story of that's where I was in the mountain in Aspen, when I had to say I have to pack things back into the truck and go down the hill. Having the awareness of those links. I'm not saying that you just stop it always here, so that means you never go fly because you stop it where it's easier. It's just recognizing that those gates were there, and that the closer you get to takeoff, the harder it is to turn around and say no. So there's more at stake, and therefore just having that in the back of the mind. And I can remember very well thinking about this whole link that day that I had to not take off and break down the glider, because I really, really wanted to go flying, and I invested quite a whole bunch to get up there in the mountain, sit up, and get ready to go. And the temptation was rather big.
Yeah.
So anyhow, those were the stories that I just wanted to share.
Chain of events, you may have mentioned it too, Loopy, but it's timeless. It must be why it's in the aviation, DNA, but it's like a timeless thing that everybody in their career at some point, and me repetitiously, needs to hear those kind of things again and again to realize, oh, I just spent hundreds of dollars to drive in gas, and I get wrapped up in it, even to this day, into the investment of what put me on the hill and the dreams I built that morning that must come true because I'm emotionally attached to this outcome happen, and then I get on the hill and it is so hard to let it go or land early when you see overdevelopment that you didn't want to see, or really not launch is probably the most important one, but there's a lot of different ways that can bite you, and as you're pushing the envelope at different points in your career, hang gliding or paragliding, honestly, most of us have that in our DNA to push the envelope more than I don't know, the typical person who is happy with any kind of a average plateau. I mean, I think everybody we know in our little world of this flying thing is like going for it all out. So we push our little envelopes along the way.
Not everybody. There's a wide variety of people in this sport too. I mean, not everybody's like you, BJ, or me for that matter.
But think about this, where the professional part connects. That person like Hernan, for example. Think about how easy it is for him to pull the plug one day compared to the pilot that does not do it professionally. So for anybody like us that, or in my case, that does it part-time, if you will, you might go once a month,
right,
or twice a month, right? Whereas, Hernan knows that if he doesn't have to do it today because he's going to be at it tomorrow and the day after. And that's what he gets paid to do, or that's what his life is like. Whereas here I went, and this is my one day of the month, and I want to, extract the best out of it. So here I am, at Boulder trying to get this little thermal to go up and be up there for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's part of what the decision making was about. Here I come, and all I have to do is go straight and land. But that means that the flight is going to be an hour, a minute and a half.
Yeah.
But if I make a left turn and I try to hit that, the thermal, I could maybe make a 40-minute run over here.
Right.
Because this is the one shot that I get for this month.
I think what this kind of comes back to is what I mentioned earlier is discipline.
Yep.
Most of us have had enough training to know when the conditions are no longer safe, or there could be an increased level of risk. But then to actually make the call and call it off takes a certain amount of discipline, because all those factors we just mentioned. So I think it kind of comes back to that we have to be honest with ourselves. Like, I just drove 18 hours through the night with BJ to fly in Texas, and then when the day came, the wind speed was just a couple of knots above what I figured I could safely handle. And the temptation was certainly there to say, fuck it, I didn't drive 18 hours through the night to call it off now. But that's when the discipline part comes in. It's like, no, I said 20 knots max, and now it's gusting to 23 or 24. So I'm going to have to honor my own decision making or my own rules and follow through. And I think that's where most people fail around here. They see big clouds behind the hill, and it's not that they don't know that big clouds behind the hill are bad or pose a risk. It's because they don't have the discipline to say, you know what, I'm not going to fly today, and even if it means that I'm not going to be able to fly for another month, again, I think it just comes back to that.
Well, the thing is this, and it's not here, it's human nature, is how we make decisions. And one of the things that I learned, and there's a book that came out that it's called How We Decide, and it goes into our emotional brain and our rational brain. And we kind of think, for the most part, that we are reasoning beings that have emotions. So that will be the disciplined person. However, the majority of humans, we're actually emotional beings that can reason when our emotional system allows us. So when our emotional system hasn't hijacked our reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, what happens is you make the emotional decision first, and then you rationalize why you made it. Like if you go and ask somebody, why, well, why are you in love with that person? And they'll give you all the, because of this or this or this. But in reality, there was an emotional connection made, and then they're just rationalizing why.
Okay.
And that applies to, whether you buy a phone or a car or something, especially when you buy a car, you say, well, that car, it's a piece of crap. Yeah, but these are the good things that it has. We do the same thing. So when we have this emotional reason to do something, that kicks in, and then all of a sudden, so let's say that we really, really, really want to go fly. That's the addiction part over there. We want it, and now the brain starts to say, when the little sensors come out and say, well, perhaps the date's not there, conditions are too strong, wind's a little too, then your brain starts saying, no, but, and starts to rationalize why are you going to break your own rule. So to recognize our brain doing that is what allows you to have the discipline. It's so when you can be present to hear your voice starting to kind of come up with all this and what is interesting is that when I look at my my event, it took me back to the instructor that said, Luis, you're putting yourself in a very risky place. It takes years for somebody to develop soaring in any sport, whether it be sailplanes, hang gliders, or paragliders. And then by the time you learn how to soar, how to stay airborne, you have gained a good feeling for the glider. In my case, I had this, over 25 years of soaring experience that were putting myself in places where my skills handling the glider didn't really catch up yet.
Right. Just like people say, a little bit of knowledge is dangerous sometimes, right?
Right. Here it was quite a bit of knowledge. He was thinking that it was way dangerous, and in the when I look back on it, his feeling and his predictions were actually correct because they led to the accident. And then I understood also why some of my friends that would say, some friends that were from hang gliding going into paragliding say, watch out because paragliding is dangerous. Well, it's not necessarily that sport is dangerous. As I point out, if you take a 757, an aircraft, a Boeing 757, and you put it on the ground, and you put a paraglider on the ground, and then you take two people from the streets that never have flown anything, and you train them for a month, one each. You train one person in the paraglider and the other person in a Boeing 757, and then after the end of 25 days, you let them go solo. Well, guess who's going to crash? I can guarantee you that it's not going to be the guy in the paraglider, because in 25 days, that machine is much, much simpler to learn than that complicated Boeing 757. So what makes that Boeing 757 safe, it's everything that goes in it. It's all the infrastructure that goes around it, is the maintenance, is the rules, is the amount of hours that you need to have before you even step in one, and it's the amount of training that you have and recurrent training and expertise that it goes in there. And as you mentioned before, it's the discipline part of it, but it's not the glider in itself.